What if I told you that Earth was never meant to be found? That for over 10,000 years, the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy have worked together to keep one small blue planet hidden from the rest of the universe? What if humanity's greatest strength wasn't our technology, our weapons, or our numbers, but something so terrifying that entire star empires would rather pretend we don't exist than face what we truly are? The Galactic Council has maintained the Terran quarantine for millennia, erasing our world from star charts, deflecting exploration fleets, and eliminating anyone who gets too close to the truth. They've built an invisible cage around our solar system, powered by the combined resources of 1,000 worlds, all to keep humanity locked away. But what happens when that cage finally breaks? What happens when the secret they've guarded for so long finally comes to light? What happens when the galaxy discovers that the monsters they've been hiding aren't the humans themselves, but what humans become when they're pushed too far? The answer is about to tear the galaxy apart, one planet at a time, and it all begins with a single transmission that should have been impossible to send. The signal came from nowhere. Commander Zexhai of the Nexari Defense Fleet stared at the impossible readings on his console, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence as he tried to process what he was seeing. The transmission was broadcasting on frequencies that hadn't been used in over 8,000 standard cycles, using encryption protocols that belonged to civilizations long dead. But that wasn't the impossible part. The impossible part was where it was coming from, Sector 7743. The Dead Zone, the area of space that every star chart in the galaxy showed as empty void, marked with warnings about gravitational anomalies and quantum storms. The sector that had been declared off-limits by the Galactic Council since before recorded history began. Sir, his communications officer, a young Vorthen named Clix, turned from her station with confusion written across her blue-scaled features. I'm getting massive interference from the Dead Zone. It's like something is blocking our sensors, but the readings are completely chaotic. Zexay's primary hands grip the arms of his command chair while his secondary hands work the controls. In his 300 cycles of service, he had never seen anything like this. The Nexari were the galaxy's premier information gatherers, their sensor technology unmatched by any other species. If their equipment couldn't penetrate whatever was in that sector, then something was very, very wrong. Analysis of the transmission, Clix. What can you tell me? The young officer's fingers danced across her console, her training taking over despite her obvious confusion. It's definitely artificial, sir. Highly compressed data burst, multiple layers of encryption. The base language appears to be unknown. No matches in our linguistic database, which includes over 47 million known languages and dialects. 47 million, Zexhai repeated slowly, and no matches. But there's something else. Clix hesitated, her scales shifting to a deeper shade of blue. The transmission is repeating, but it's not a loop. Each repetition contains slight variations, as if it's being modified in real time. Sir, I think someone is actively trying to communicate with us. Before Zexhai could respond, his tactical officer's alarm rang across the bridge. Lieutenant Thorne, a grizzled Corvin veteran, looked up from his displays with an expression that in his species indicated extreme concern. Commander, we have incoming vessels. 3 ships, unknown configuration, approaching from the direction of the Dead Zone. They're moving fast, sir. Faster than anything in our databases. On screen, Zex-K ordered. The main display flickered to life, showing the star field ahead of them. At first, there was nothing visible except the usual scatter of distant suns. Then 3 points of light resolved out of the darkness, growing rapidly larger. As they approached, the ship's designs became visible, and Zexai felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. The vessels were unlike anything he had ever seen. They moved with an organic fluidity that defied conventional understanding of space travel, their hulls seeming to shift and adapt as they flew. Most disturbing of all, they showed no signs of the massive energy signatures that should accompany faster-than-light travel. They were simply there, as if they had stepped out of one point in space and into another. "Sir!" Clix called out, her voice tight with tension. I'm receiving a new transmission, same source, but this one's different. It's in Galactic Standard. Put it through, Zexay commanded. The voice that filled the bridge was unlike anything any of them had heard before. It was clearly artificial, processed through some kind of translation matrix, but there was something underneath it that seemed almost familiar, something that spoke to genetic memories buried deep in their evolutionary past. You have entered restricted space. This is your only warning. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. Thorn looked up from his tactical display, his tusks grinding together in what his people called a war grimace. Sir, they're targeting us. I'm reading energy buildups that are off our scales. Whatever weapons they're carrying, they're powerful enough to crack a moon. Zexay stood slowly, his mind racing through possibilities. The Nexari were explorers and information gatherers, not warriors, but his ship was equipped with the most advanced defensive systems in the galaxy. Still, something about those three vessels made every survival instinct he possessed scream warnings. Open a channel, he ordered. This is Commander Zexay of the Nexari vessel Scholar's Dream. We are a peaceful exploration vessel operating under the authority of the Galactic Council. We detected your transmission and came to investigate. We mean no harm and will withdraw if requested, but we request dialogue under the Galactic Peace Accords. The response came immediately, and this time the voice carried something that made Zexay's blood run cold. It carried amusement. Galactic Council, the voice repeated, and somehow it managed to pack volumes of meaning into those two words. How interesting. Tell me, Commander Zexay, what do you know about Earth? The question hit the bridge like a physical blow. Zexay felt his legs weaken, and he heard sharp intakes of breath from his crew. Earth was a word that no one spoke aloud, a name that existed only in the deepest, most classified archives of the Council. It was the reason for the Dead Zone, the source of the greatest shame in galactic history. I don't understand, Zexay managed, though his voice betrayed him. Oh, I think you do, the voice continued, and now there was something hungry in it. I think you know exactly what Earth is, what humans are, what your precious council has been hiding for the last 10,000 years. On the screen, the three ships had stopped their approach, but they maintained their targeting locks. Zexay could see weapon ports opening along their hulls, revealing technology that seemed to bend light around itself. We know about the quarantine, Commander. We know about the sensor screens, the deflection fields, the memory suppressors. We know about the kill orders for anyone who gets too close to the Sol system. We know about it all because we've been watching, waiting, learning. Clix turned from her station, her face pale with terror. Sir, I'm detecting massive energy readings throughout the Dead Zone. It's like space itself is waking up. There are structures out there, Commander, massive structures that weren't there a moment ago. The question is, the voice from the unknown ships continued, what are you going to do with this knowledge? Are you going to run back to your council masters and report what you found? Or are you going to listen to what we have to tell you about the galaxy you think you know? Zexay looked around his bridge, seeing his own fear reflected in the faces of his crew. Every protocol, every regulation, every law of civilized space told him to withdraw immediately and contact the council. But something else, something deeper, told him that this moment would define not just his career, but possibly the fate of every living being in the galaxy. We're listening, he said finally. Good, the voice replied, and now there was something that might have been approval in it. Then let me tell you about the day your ancestors decided that humanity was too dangerous to be allowed to exist freely. Let me tell you about the war that never ended and the prison you built around an entire star system. And let me tell you why that prison is about to break. The main screen shifted, and suddenly Zexay was looking at something impossible. It was a star system, yes, but one that blazed with artificial light from millions of structures, orbital habitats the size of moons, space elevators stretching between worlds, and ships beyond counting, filling the void between planets like a metallic sea. This is Sol System, Commander. This is Earth. This is what 10,000 years of enforced isolation has created, and now, finally, we're coming home. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the scholar's dream in absolute silence. Zek's eyes stared at the screen, his mind struggling to process what he had just seen. The dead zone wasn't empty. It had never been empty. Humanity hadn't been destroyed or contained. They had been growing, building, preparing. "Sir!" Thorne's voice was barely a whisper. "What do we do?" Before Zexhai could answer, the three unknown ships began to move again. But instead of approaching or attacking, they turned and headed back toward the heart of the dead zone. As they departed, one final message reached the scholar's dream. "You have 72 standard hours to decide, Commander. Run to your council and warn them that humanity has returned, or stay and learn the truth about the galaxy you serve. Choose wisely. The next time we meet, there may not be an option for dialogue." The ships vanished, not into faster-than-light travel, but simply fading away as if they had never existed. The only evidence of their presence was the data stored in the scholar's dream's computers, and the image burned into the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. Zexay slowly returned to his command chair, his thoughts churning. In the space of less than an hour, everything he believed about the galaxy had been turned upside down. The Galactic Council, the organization that had brought peace and order to 10,000 worlds, had apparently been built on a lie. Humanity, the species that existed only in whispered legends and classified reports, was not only alive but had apparently been preparing for something for millennia. "Clicks," he said finally, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "Send a message to Council Central. Priority 1 encryption. Tell them we've made contact with an unknown civilization in Sector 7743. "Sir," she asked quietly, What about the other thing? What about Earth?" Zexay looked out at the stars, seeing them with new eyes. Somewhere out there, hidden behind barriers of deception and fear, was a species that had been judged too dangerous for the galaxy to know about. But what if the galaxy had been wrong? What if humanity wasn't the monster that needed to be locked away, but the victim of the galaxy's own paranoia? "One thing at a time," he said. "First, we need to understand what we're dealing with. Then, we can decide what the galaxy needs to know." As the scholar's dream began its journey back toward Council space, none of its crew noticed the small probe that detached from their hull and began broadcasting a tight beam signal toward the heart of the dead zone. The message it carried was simple, containing only the ship's identity course and the full recording of everything that had just transpired. Deep in the Sol system, in a command center that orbited the Earth like a mechanical moon, a figure in a dark uniform received the probe's transmission and smiled. The plan was working perfectly. The galaxy that had imprisoned humanity for 10,000 years was about to learn that their prisoners had not been idle. "Phase 2 is authorized," she said into her communicator. "Begin the awakening." Across the solar system, dormant installations came online for the first time in millennia. Ancient weapons platforms powered up, their targeting systems beginning to sweep the galaxy for the locations of council worlds. Ships that had been waiting in the outer darkness began to move, their courses set for destinations light years away. The cage was opening, and what emerged would change the galaxy forever. Humanity was coming home, and they were bringing 10,000 years of righteous anger with them. Council Central was a marvel of galactic engineering, a space station the size of a small planet that served as the administrative heart of the most powerful alliance in known space. Its corridors buzzed with activity as representatives from thousands of species conducted the business of maintaining peace across the galaxy. Today, however, those corridors carried an undercurrent of tension that had not been felt in over a century. High Counselor Varric Thule stood before the massive curved window of his private office, his crystalline form refracting the light from the central star in patterns that indicated deep contemplation. Behind him, the emergency session of the Inner Council was in full swing, but he had temporarily withdrawn from the heated discussions to process the magnitude of what they were facing. The report from Commander Zexhai had arrived 6 hours ago, and in those 6 hours the careful order that the Council had maintained for millennia was beginning to unravel. The Nexari commander's account was impossible to dismiss. His ship's sensor logs, the recorded transmissions, the visual evidence of the massive installations in the Sol system, All of it painted a picture that terrified the galaxy's leadership to their core. Humanity was awake. "High Counselor," came a voice behind him. Varek Thul turned to see Counselor Yindar, the elderly Alteran who served as the Council's chief historian and keeper of the most classified archives. Her usual composure was cracked, her pale blue skin showing the stress markings that her species displayed in times of extreme emotional duress. "The Inner Council is requesting your immediate return," she continued. "The Vorthan delegation is demanding full disclosure of the Terran files, and the Corvin military representatives are pushing for immediate preemptive action." Varektul's form shimmered, the crystalline facets of his body shifting to deeper, more somber hues. "And what does the historical record suggest we should do, Yindar?" "Your people were among the first to encounter humanity, were they not?" The Altarian's expression darkened. "My ancestors spoke of them as demons in mortal flesh. Beings that could not be reasoned with, could not be contained, could not be defeated through conventional means. The early reports described creatures that seemed to violate every natural law governing civilized behavior. And yet," Varektul observed, "they were contained." "The quarantine held for 10,000 years. The quarantine held because we made them believe they were alone," Yindar corrected, "because we isolated their solar system so completely that they had no choice but to turn inward. The question now is, what have 10,000 years of isolation created?" Before Varekthul could respond, an alarm began sounding throughout the station. Not the general alert that indicated a routine emergency, but the deep, bone-shaking tone that had only been heard once before in the station's history. The tone that meant the unthinkable had happened. "All senior staff to emergency command," came the voice of the station's AI. "Priority Alpha situation. This is not a drill." The two counselors exchanged glances and hurried toward the command center. The corridors filled with beings from dozens of species, all moving with the controlled urgency that came from extensive training. As they reached the command center, Varektul could see the massive holographic display that dominated the room, and what it showed made his crystalline core go cold. Fleet Admiral Korksan, a massive Corvin whose scarred hide spoke of decades of military service, stood before the display with his hands clasped behind his back. The hologram showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy with council worlds marked in blue and known trade routes highlighted in green. But there were new elements on the map now. Red markers appeared to be spreading outward from a region of space that the display labeled only as Restricted Zone 7743. "Report," Varekthul ordered as he took his place at the central command station. 37 minutes ago," Admiral Korksan began, his gravelly voice carrying across the command center, "we began receiving reports of unknown vessels appearing in systems across the Outer Rim. At first, we thought it was a coordinate error or sensor malfunction. Then the reports started coming from the mid-rim worlds, then the core systems." The Admiral gestured to the display and the red markers began to pulse. "As of this moment, we have confirmed sightings of unidentified spacecraft in over 400 systems. They appear without warning, remain for exactly 10 minutes while conducting what appears to be detailed scans, then vanish just as suddenly." "Scans of what?" asked Counselor Valtar, the Nexari representative whose species prided themselves on their information-gathering capabilities. "Everything," Admiral Korksan replied grimly. "Planetary defenses, fleet dispositions, industrial capabilities, population centers. They're conducting a comprehensive military intelligence operation on a scale that no single species could manage." Varekthul felt the weight of 10,000 years of carefully maintained secrets pressing down on him. "Have any of these vessels attempted communication?" "That's the disturbing part," the Admiral continued. "They're not just scanning randomly. The ships appear to be targeting specific systems, specific installations. And when our forces attempt to intercept them, they display technology that we can't explain. Faster than light travel without the energy signatures we thought were required. Stealth capabilities that make them invisible to sensors until they choose to reveal themselves. And weapons," he paused, his expression grim. "In the 3 instances where our forces attempted to engage, the unknown vessels destroyed our ships without apparent effort." "Show me," Varekthul ordered. The display shifted to show a tactical recording from the Corvin Border Patrol. A small fleet of 6 destroyers was approaching what appeared to be empty space when suddenly 3 sleek vessels appeared around them. The engagement lasted exactly 14 seconds. When it was over, the 6 destroyers were expanding clouds of debris, and the 3 unknown ships had vanished once again. "By the Ancient Ones," whispered Yindar. "What kind of beings can do this?" Varekthul knew the answer to that question, though he had hoped never to speak it aloud. Computer, display classified file designation Terra 7743, authorization Varekthul Alpha 9. Authorization confirmed. Warning: this file contains information classified at the highest level. Unauthorized access is punishable by memory wipe and exile. The holographic display changed, showing a star system that blazed with artificial light. Massive orbital installations surrounded every planet. Space elevators stretched between worlds, and the space between was filled with so many ships that they looked like metallic clouds. "This is the Sol system," Varekthul announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the command center. "This is where humanity lives. This is what 10,000 years of isolation has created." The command center fell silent. Many of the beings present had never heard the word humanity spoken aloud. It existed only in the deepest archives, in files that required the highest clearance levels to access. "Sir," came a voice from one of the communication stations, "we're receiving a transmission. It's coming from everywhere." "Explain," Admiral Corkson ordered. "The signal is being broadcast simultaneously from every one of the locations where the unknown ships appeared. It's in galactic standard, and it's being transmitted on frequencies that every species in the galaxy uses for emergency broadcasts." "Put it through," Varekthul said, though every instinct told him he would regret the decision. The voice that filled the command center was the same one that Commander Zexhai had heard, but now it carried additional harmonics, as if it were being spoken by multiple beings in perfect synchronization. "Greetings, Galactic Council. My name is Admiral Sarah Chen, Commanding Officer of the Human Liberation Fleet. I'm sure that by now you've noticed our ships conducting reconnaissance operations throughout your territory. Please don't be alarmed. We're simply reacquainting ourselves with the galaxy that chose to forget we exist." The Admiral continued, and there was something in her voice that made every being in the command center feel like prey animals being studied by a predator. "We know that many of you have no knowledge of humanity or the events that led to our isolation. This is by design. Your council has spent 10,000 years ensuring that the galaxy forgot we ever existed. They've edited us out of history, suppressed all records of our achievements, and built an elaborate lie that has shaped galactic civilization for millennia." On the holographic display, images began to appear. Vast fleets of ships unlike anything in current galactic technology, worlds being terraformed with methods that seemed to violate known science, space habitats that dwarfed the largest council installations. "But we remember," Admiral Chen continued, "we remember the day your ancestors decided that humanity was too dangerous to be allowed to exist freely in the galaxy. We remember the attacks on our colonies, the destruction of our trade fleets, the systematic campaign to drive us back to our home system. We remember being told that we were monsters, that our nature made us incompatible with civilized space." The images shifted, showing what appeared to be historical records of conflict. Ships bearing early council insignia attacking vessels of unfamiliar design, planets under bombardment, massive installations being systematically destroyed. "You called us violent, but it was your fleets that attacked our peaceful colonies. You called us aggressive, but it was your forces that started the war. You called us monsters, but it was your leaders who decided that an entire species deserved to be imprisoned for the crime of existing." Admiral Corkson stepped forward. "This is propaganda," he declared. "The historical records show that humanity was contained because they were a threat to galactic peace." Admiral Chen's voice took on a tone of cold amusement. "Admiral Corksan, grandson of war leader Korksul, who led the assault on the Centauri colonies in the year 2387 of the old calendar. Your family has profited from humanity's exile for generations. Did they tell you how many human children died in that attack? Did they explain that Centauri Prime was a research station dedicated to developing medical technology to help other species? The Corvan Admiral's face went pale beneath his dark hide. The information Admiral Chen had just recited was contained in files that were supposed to be impossible to access. Oh yes, Admiral Chen continued, we know all about the real history. Every classified file, every hidden record, every suppressed report. 10,000 years has given us a lot of time to piece together the truth. And now, finally, we're in a position to share that truth with the galaxy. The transmission paused, and when it resumed, Admiral Chen's voice carried a note of barely controlled fury. The Galactic Council was built on a lie. Your peace, your prosperity, your entire civilization exists because you stole our rightful place in the galaxy and condemned an entire species to imprisonment. You created a golden age for yourselves by making us the enemy that you needed to unite against. New images appeared on the display, documents that bore the seals of the earliest council worlds, showing planning sessions where the human problem was discussed, maps showing human colonies marked for containment actions, communication logs detailing the systematic campaign to drive humanity from every world they had settled. But your cage had an unexpected side effect, Admiral Chen said, and now there was something that might have been gratitude in her voice. By forcing us to turn inward, by giving us no choice but to develop in isolation, you created something that you never expected. You gave us 10,000 years to evolve, to adapt, to become something far more than what we were when you first decided we were too dangerous to exist. The holographic display showed the Sol system again, but this time the images were moving, showing the massive installations in operation. Ships larger than space stations moved between worlds. Structures that defied understanding stretched across the space between planets, and everywhere the sense of overwhelming, incomprehensible scale. We are no longer the species you remember, Admiral Chen concluded. We are something new, something shaped by 10,000 years of isolation, determination, and the absolute certainty that someday we would return to claim what was stolen from us. That day has come. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in absolute silence. Varric looked around at the faces of the galaxy's most powerful leaders and saw his own terror reflected in all of them. Options, he said finally. Admiral Corkson straightened to his full, imposing height. We fight. We've maintained the largest military force in galactic history specifically for this possibility. We have weapons and ships that humanity has never seen. Based on what we've observed, Counselor Veltar interjected, I'm not certain our conventional forces would be effective against their technology. Then we use unconventional forces, the Admiral replied grimly. The Council has assets that even most of us don't know about. This is what they were created for. Varric Tool considered the options before them. They could attempt diplomacy, but Admiral Chen's transmission suggested that humanity was not interested in negotiation. They could attempt to mobilize the galaxy for war, but that would require explaining 10,000 years of lies to beings who had built their entire civilization on the foundation of those lies. There is another option, Yindar said quietly. We could tell the truth, reveal the real history to the galaxy, and ask for forgiveness. Admiral Corksan snorted. Forgiveness? From a species we've kept imprisoned for 10 millennia? They've made it clear that they consider us enemies. There will be no mercy from them. Then we prepare for war, Varric Thol decided. But not just any war. If humanity has become what I suspect they have, this will be unlike any conflict the galaxy has ever seen. Send word to all Council worlds. Activate Protocol 7. Begin planetary evacuations of non-essential personnel. Sir, asked one of the younger officers, what should we tell the populations? They'll want to know why we're mobilizing. Varric Thol looked out at the stars, knowing that somewhere among them humanity was preparing for the reckoning that had been 10,000 years in the making. Tell them, he said slowly, that we're about to face the consequences of our ancestors' greatest mistake. Elena Vasquez had spent her entire career studying the impossible, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. Standing in the observation deck of the UES Retribution, humanity's flagship and the largest vessel ever constructed, she watched as the galaxy that had forgotten her species slowly came into view through the quantum barriers that had hidden Sol System for 10,000 years. The barriers themselves were a testament to human ingenuity and determination. What the Galactic Council believed to be an impenetrable prison of their own design had actually been commandeered by humanity within the first century of their isolation. The quantum field generators, the sensor scramblers, the gravitational anomaly projectors, all of it had been reverse engineered, improved, and turned into the perfect laboratory for human development. "It's beautiful," whispered Dr. James Park, the elderly xenobiologist standing beside her. "After all these generations, we finally get to see what our ancestors lost." Elena nodded, though her thoughts were more complex than simple appreciation. As the chief science officer of the Liberation Fleet, she understood better than most what humanity had become during their isolation. The species emerging from Sol System bore little resemblance to the one that had been driven into hiding 10 millennia ago. "Dr. Vasquez," came a voice behind them. They turned to see Admiral Chen approaching, her dark uniform bearing the insignia of the Human Liberation Command. The Admiral moved with the fluid grace that all fourth-generation enhanced humans possessed, her augmented physiology allowing her to navigate the ship's gravity field as easily as others might walk through air. "Admiral," Elena replied, offering a slight bow. "The quantum barriers are holding steady. Our concealment remains intact while we conduct reconnaissance." "Good. What's your assessment of galactic civilization?" Elena activated her neural interface and data flowed directly into her consciousness. After 10,000 years of development, the line between human and technology had become beautifully blurred. She existed simultaneously as flesh and as information, her awareness extending throughout the ship's systems and beyond. "Fascinating," she said, her eyes focusing on patterns that existed beyond normal human perception. "They've achieved remarkable stability, but at the cost of innovation. Their technology has plateaued at roughly the same level as when we were exiled. They've become risk-averse, bureaucratic, focused on maintaining order rather than pushing boundaries. And militarily? Impressive in scale, but their strategic thinking is dated. They fight like armies, not like organisms. They rely on predictable formations, established supply lines, conventional physics. They have no understanding of the warfare paradigms we've developed." Admiral Chen moved to the observation window, her enhanced vision allowing her to see details that would be invisible to unaugmented humans. "Dr. Park, your thoughts on the biological diversity we've observed?" The xenobiologist's excitement was evident as he accessed his own data streams. "Incredible, Admiral. Over 15,000 distinct species in active council membership with genetic diversity that spans the entire spectrum of carbon-based life. But here's the interesting part. They've remained essentially unchanged since our exile. No significant evolutionary pressure, no adaptive challenges. They've created such a stable environment that natural selection has essentially ceased for most species. While we," Elena added, "have undergone more evolutionary change in 10,000 years than most species experience in a million. The isolation forced us to adapt, to improve, to transcend our original biological limitations." It was true. The humans emerging from Sol System were as different from their ancestors as their ancestors had been from early primates. Genetic engineering, cybernetic enhancement, consciousness transfer, and symbiotic artificial intelligence had created beings that were still recognizably human but possessed capabilities that bordered on the divine. "Admiral," came a voice through the ship's communication system. "We're receiving reports from our reconnaissance teams. All outer rim sweeps are complete, and we've established monitoring posts in 300 systems." "Excellent, Dr. Vasquez. What have we learned about Council military capabilities?" Elena's awareness extended across the quantum communication network that connected the Liberation Fleet. Instantly, she accessed reports from thousands of reconnaissance drones, stealth ships, and infiltration units that had been gathering intelligence throughout Council space. "Their fleets are large but technologically stagnant," she reported. They rely on brute force rather than innovation. Their ship designs haven't fundamentally changed in over 5,000 years. Most concerning from their perspective, they have no defense against quantum phase technology or consciousness-level warfare. Admiral Chen nodded grimly, and their response to our presence? Predictable. They've activated what they call Protocol 7, which appears to be their standard response to existential threats. They're mobilizing fleets, evacuating civilian populations, and attempting to coordinate a galaxy-wide defense. What they don't realize is that we've been monitoring their communications for centuries. The Admiral turned from the window, her expression serious. Then it's time for Phase 3. Dr. Park, initiate contact with the scientific communities on the major council worlds. Dr. Vasquez, I want you to prepare the consciousness bridge protocols. Elena felt a shiver of anticipation run through her enhanced nervous system. The consciousness bridge was humanity's most advanced diplomatic technology, allowing for direct mind-to-mind communication across species barriers. It was also, potentially, the most dangerous thing they could attempt. Admiral, are you certain the bridge protocols could be misinterpreted as an attack? Direct consciousness contact with unprepared minds has unpredictable results. I'm aware of the risks, Admiral Chen replied, but after 10,000 years, I think it's time the galaxy understood what they're really dealing with. 3 hours later, Elena stood in the consciousness bridge chamber deep within the Retribution's core. The room was a marvel of human technology filled with quantum processors that could map and interface with virtually any form of sapient thought. Around her, dozens of technicians prepared the equipment that would allow her to directly contact minds across the galaxy. Beginning Phase 3 implementation, she announced, her voice carrying through the ship's neural network to Admiral Chen and the other senior officers. Target selection complete. We'll be making contact with the leading scientists, philosophers, and thought leaders on 17 major council worlds. Remember, Admiral Chen's voice came through the quantum link, we're not trying to conquer their minds. We're trying to show them the truth. Help them understand what humanity has become. Elena settled into the interface chair, feeling the neural connections engage with her enhanced nervous system. Gradually, her consciousness began to expand, flowing out through the quantum communication network toward the distant stars where the galaxy's greatest minds waited unknowingly for contact. The first mind she touched belonged to Dr. Kelteran, the premier physicist of the Alteran Science Academy. She felt his shock as her consciousness brushed against his, followed immediately by fear as he realized that something impossible was happening. Please don't be afraid, Elena projected, her thoughts carefully modulated to avoid overwhelming the alien mind. My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez. I'm a scientist, like you. I want to share something with you. Instead of trying to explain with words, Elena simply opened her memories. She showed Dr. Kelteran what Soul System had become. She shared the history of human development, the technological advances, the philosophical breakthroughs, the evolution of consciousness itself. She let him experience for just a moment what it felt like to exist as both biological and digital, to think with the speed of quantum processors while still feeling with an essentially human heart. The Altarian scientist's mind reeled as he tried to process what he was experiencing. His people were among the most intellectually advanced in the galaxy, but even they had never conceived of the possibility that consciousness could be enhanced and expanded while still retaining its essential nature. This is impossible, his thoughts projected back to her. Consciousness can't be artificially enhanced without losing its fundamental character. That's what we believed too, Elena replied, until we were forced to try. 10,000 years of isolation will teach you that impossible is just another word for unexplored. She moved to the next contact, a Korvan philosopher named Takmar who had spent his career studying the nature of identity and existence. His warrior species mind was more resistant to the contact, but Elena persisted, showing him how humanity had learned to preserve the essence of individual identity while expanding the boundaries of experience and understanding. One by one, she made contact with brilliant minds across the galaxy. With each connection, she shared not just information, but understanding. She helped them experience, if only for a moment, what 10,000 years of forced evolution had created. The responses varied by species and individual. Some minds shut down from shock. Others embraced the contact with desperate hunger for knowledge. A few, the most advanced and flexible, began to grasp the true magnitude of what humanity had become. "We're receiving responses," reported Dr. Park from his monitoring station. "The initial shock is giving way to curiosity. Several of the contacted individuals are attempting to establish permanent communication links." Elena gradually withdrew her consciousness from the galactic network, feeling the familiar disorientation as her awareness contracted back to her individual mind.
"How many successful contacts? 47 out of 52 attempts."
The failures were all due to psychological incompatibility rather than technical problems.
"Admiral, we're receiving communication requests from multiple Council worlds."
"They want to talk." Admiral Chen's voice came through the ship's systems. "Patch them through to the main communications array. It's time for a proper introduction." The main display in the consciousness bridge chamber activated, showing a split screen with multiple communication channels. Elena could see beings from dozens of species, their faces showing various combinations of fear, curiosity, and amazement. Dr. Kelteran was the first to speak. "Dr. Vasquez, what I experienced was that real, has humanity truly evolved to such a degree?"
"It's real," Elena confirmed.
"And it's just the beginning. The consciousness enhancement you experienced represents our current baseline. Our most advanced individuals exist partially outside normal space-time, their awareness spanning multiple dimensions simultaneously."
A Nexari scientist named Zilkar leaned forward in her display.
"But how is this possible? Evolution doesn't work that fast, and artificial intelligence can't truly enhance consciousness without destroying it." "You're thinking in terms of natural evolution," Dr. Park interjected, appearing on the display beside Elena. "But we weren't working with natural timescales. We had 10,000 years of complete isolation, unlimited resources, and the absolute necessity of survival. When your species faces extinction, you discover that the impossible becomes merely difficult." "But the implications," whispered a Vorthan psychologist named Dr. Upbale. "Yena? If consciousness can be enhanced while preserving identity, if the boundaries between biological and artificial can be dissolved, then everything you think you know about the nature of sapience, of life itself, becomes obsolete," Elena finished, "which is exactly what happened to us. We didn't just develop new technology or new strategies, we became something new, something that your galaxy has never seen before." The various beings on the display exchanged glances, their expression showing the mental struggle of brilliant minds trying to process paradigm-shifting information. "Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Quinche," Kelteran said finally, "what do you want from us? What does humanity intend to do?" Elena looked toward the observation window where the stars of the galaxy beckoned beyond the quantum barriers. "We want our freedom," she said simply. "We want the right to exist in the galaxy that our ancestors helped build. We want the lies to end and the truth to be told." "And if the Council refuses?" asked Dr. Zilker. Before Elena could answer, Admiral Chen's voice came through the communication system, heard by every being on the display. "Then the galaxy will learn what 10,000 years of enforced evolution has taught us about survival," she said, her words carrying a weight that made several of the scientists visibly flinch. "We are not the same species that was driven into exile. We are something new, something that has been shaped by isolation, necessity, and the absolute determination to never again be at the mercy of those who would deny our right to exist." The communication channels went silent as the implications of that statement sank in. Elena could see the fear in their eyes, but also something else, understanding. For the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy was beginning to grasp what they were truly dealing with. "The choice is yours," Elena said gently. "Help us find a peaceful path forward, or watch as we create our own. But understand this, we are not asking for permission. We are informing you of reality. Humanity has returned to the galaxy and nothing will ever be the same again." As the communication channels closed one by one, Elena remained in the consciousness bridge chamber, her enhanced awareness monitoring the quantum communication networks that carried news of humanity's return across the galaxy. The responses were immediate and varied. Some worlds called for immediate military action. Others demanded diplomatic solutions. A few, led by the scientists who had experienced direct consciousness contact, began advocating for a complete reevaluation of galactic policy regarding humanity. But beneath all the political maneuvering and strategic planning, Elena could sense something else spreading through galactic consciousness. The growing realization that the galaxy's greatest fear was not that humanity had remained the same during their exile. The greatest fear was that they had become something infinitely more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined. The war began not with massive fleet engagements or planetary bombardments, but with a single transmission that reached every communication device in the galaxy simultaneously. Captain Marcus Webb of the Human Liberation Fleet stood on the bridge of the UES Prometheus, watching as the final preparations for Operation Revelation were completed. Around him, his crew of enhanced humans moved with the fluid precision that came from minds that could process information at quantum speeds, while bodies that had been perfected through millennia of genetic refinement carried out their tasks. "All ships report ready, Captain," announced Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim, her consciousness interfacing directly with the fleet's command network. "Phase 4 assets are in position throughout Council space," Marcus nodded, his augmented perception allowing him to see the entire operational picture simultaneously. Hidden throughout the galaxy, sleeper ships that had been infiltrating Council space for centuries were activated. Space stations that had been disguised as asteroids were powering up weapon systems. Quantum communication arrays that had been masquerading as natural phenomena were coming online. The Galactic Council had spent 10,000 years believing they had contained humanity within Sol's system. What they hadn't realized was that humans had been escaping their prison almost from the beginning, spreading throughout the galaxy like seeds carried on a cosmic wind. They had built, hidden, planned, and prepared for this moment across millennia. "Initiate Operation Revelation," Marcus ordered. Across the galaxy, the evidence of humanity's true reach became visible for the first time. Cloaking fields dropped from installations that had been hidden for thousands of years. Ships that had been disguised as derelict hulks revealed their true nature. Space stations that had been built inside hollowed-out asteroids opened their armor plating to reveal weapons platforms capable of sterilizing entire star systems. But the most shocking revelation wasn't the scale of human preparation. It was what humanity had become. On Nexar Prime, the capital world of the Nexari Intelligence Network, Director Zexnal stared at his displays in horror as human ships appeared throughout his system. But these weren't ships in any conventional sense. They were organisms, vast biomechanical constructs that pulsed with their own life force. Some were obviously grown rather than built, their hulls rippling with what appeared to be muscle tissue and neural networks. Others seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time, their forms shifting between dimensions in ways that hurt to observe directly. "Director?" his aide whispered, her voice trembling. "They're not just ships." "They're alive, Doctor." Before Zexnal could respond, one of the bioships began transmitting. The voice that filled the command center was distinctly human, but there was something else beneath it, something that suggested the speaker existed across multiple levels of reality simultaneously. "Director Zexnal," the voice said, and somehow it carried perfect knowledge of who he was, what he feared, and what he valued most. "My name is Captain Maria Santos, though I must explain that my current existence encompasses more than that simple designation suggests. I am both individual and collective, both human and something beyond your current understanding of life." The main display activated, showing the interior of the bioship. What Zexnal saw there challenged every assumption he had ever made about the nature of consciousness and identity. Captain Santos appeared human at first glance, but her form seemed to blend seamlessly with the ship around her. Neural pathways that were obviously part of her nervous system extended into the walls, ceiling, and floor. Her consciousness clearly existed throughout the vessel, making the distinction between captain and ship meaningless. "This is impossible," Zexnal breathed. "Biological and technological systems can't achieve that level of integration without losing individual identity." Your science is 10,000 years out of date, Captain Santos replied, and her smile carried both amusement and something that might have been pity. We've transcended the limitations that your species still accept as absolute. We are still human, but we are also something more. We are individuals, but we are also part of a greater collective consciousness that spans the entire human species. Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy. On Corvin warrior worlds, human ships that looked like crystalline growths were demonstrating defensive capabilities that seemed to violate the laws of physics. Energy weapons that should have been capable of cracking planets simply dispersed harmlessly against hull materials that appeared to be living crystal matrices. On Altarian science worlds, human representatives who existed simultaneously as physical beings and pure information were engaging in debates with the galaxy's greatest minds about the nature of reality itself. They spoke casually of traveling through dimensions that mainstream galactic science insisted were theoretical constructs. On Vorthan trade worlds, economic systems that had been stable for millennia were collapsing as humans demonstrated manufacturing capabilities that could produce entire fleets of ships from raw materials in a matter of hours. They grew technology rather than building it, their industrial systems more akin to vast gardens than traditional factories. But perhaps the most disturbing revelation came on the Council Central itself, where High Counselor Varkthul found himself face-to-face with Admiral Chen, not through holographic communication, but in person, despite the fact that she had somehow appeared in his private office without triggering any of the station's extensive security systems. "How did you get here?" Varkthul demanded, his crystalline form cycling through colors that indicated extreme stress. Admiral Chen smiled, her appearance perfectly human despite the obvious impossibility of her presence. "I walked," she said simply, "through dimensions that your people haven't yet learned to perceive. Space and time are much more flexible concepts than your species realizes." She moved to the large window that looked out on the galaxy beyond, her movements flowing with a grace that suggested her body operated according to different physical laws than those that governed other beings. "High Counselor, I want you to understand something. This isn't a conquest. This isn't revenge, though we certainly have cause for that. This is an awakening. For 10,000 years, your galaxy has existed in a state of artificial stability, maintained by the lie that humanity was too dangerous to be allowed freedom. That lie is about to end. We did what was necessary, Varkthul insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. Humanity was aggressive, expansionist, unwilling to abide by galactic law. We were young, Admiral Chen agreed. Young and impetuous and convinced that our way was the only way, rather like your galaxy is now. But we learned, we grew, we evolved, we became something that your greatest philosophers couldn't imagine and your most advanced scientists can't explain. She turned from the window, and for a moment Varkthul could see something in her eyes that was far older and wiser than any individual should possess. It was as if he were looking not at a single person but at the accumulated experience of an entire species. "The question now," Admiral Chen continued, "is whether your galaxy is capable of the same growth, whether you can accept that your understanding of life, consciousness, and existence itself is fundamentally incomplete, whether you can embrace the reality that humanity has transcended every limitation you thought was absolute." Before Varkthul could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the station. The Admiral tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something only she could hear. "Ah," she said with what might have been regret, "it appears that Admiral Korksan has decided to initiate military action against our ships. I had hoped to avoid this, but perhaps a demonstration is necessary." The main display in Varkthul's office activated, showing a tactical view of the space around Council Central. A massive Corvin battle fleet was approaching one of the human bioships, weapons charging for what was obviously intended to be an overwhelming first strike. "Admiral Chen," Varkthul said urgently, "call off this engagement. Admiral Korksan commands the most powerful fleet in galactic history. Your ship will be destroyed." "Will it?" Admiral Chen asked mildly. On the display, the Corvin fleet opened fire. Thousands of energy weapons, kinetic projectiles, and exotic particle beams struck the human ship in a coordinated assault that should have been capable of destroying a small moon. The explosion was visible from light years away, a brilliant nova of destructive energy that illuminated half the star system. When the light faded, the human ship was not only undamaged, it was larger. The bioship had somehow absorbed the energy of the attack and used it to fuel its own growth. What had been a kilometer-long vessel was now nearly 10 kilometers in length, its living hull pulsing with absorbed power. "Impossible," Varakthul whispered. "Your science is based on the assumption that energy can only be destroyed or converted," Admiral Chen explained. "We learned to make it obedient, to convince it that our purposes were more important than the laws that supposedly govern its behavior." The human ship began to move toward the Corvan fleet, but not through any visible propulsion system. It simply expressed its desire to be elsewhere, and reality accommodated that desire. Space folded around the vessel, bringing it into close proximity with Admiral Korksan's flagship. "The Corvan Admiral is preparing to ram our ship," Admiral Chen observed, her consciousness clearly monitoring the situation in real time. A brave gesture, but ultimately pointless. The massive Corvan dreadnought, a ship that massed several million tons and was equipped with the most advanced armor in galactic history, struck the human bioship at full acceleration. The collision should have destroyed both vessels. Instead, the Corvan ship simply passed through the human vessel as if it were made of light and shadow. "We exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously," Admiral Chen explained as Varakthul stared at the impossible sight. "Physical attacks can only affect us if we allow them to. We've learned to edit our interaction with reality at the quantum level." The human ship reappeared on the other side of the Corvan fleet, completely unharmed. But now something was happening to Admiral Korksan's forces. The ships were slowing, their crews apparently unable to continue the attack. "What are you doing to them?" Varakthul demanded. "Nothing harmful," Admiral Chen assured him. "We're simply sharing knowledge with their crews, showing them the truth about the galaxy they've been living in, about the lies their leaders have told them, about what humanity has really become." Throughout the Corvan fleet, crews were experiencing the same direct consciousness contact that the galaxy's leading scientists had undergone days earlier. But this time, the contact was deeper, more comprehensive. The human collective consciousness was sharing not just information, but understanding. Not just facts, but wisdom. Within minutes, the Corvan fleet had stopped firing entirely. Ship by ship, crews were sending messages requesting dialogue rather than destruction. The accumulated weight of 10,000 years of human growth and development was overwhelming their preconceptions about the nature of the conflict. "This is how we fight now," Admiral Chen told Varakthul. "Not by destroying our enemies, but by showing them the truth. Not by conquering territory, but by expanding consciousness. We've learned that the most powerful weapon in the universe is understanding." Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy. Wherever Council forces engaged human ships, the result was not destruction but enlightenment. Human crews that existed as collective consciousnesses were sharing their expanded awareness with beings that had never conceived of such possibilities. Warriors were laying down arms as they experienced what it meant to exist beyond the limitations of individual identity. Scientists were abandoning everything they thought they knew as they glimpsed realities that their theories couldn't explain. "Counselor," Admiral Chen said, her voice carrying the weight of inevitable change, "the galaxy you've known for 10,000 years is ending. The question is whether it will end in understanding or in chaos. Whether your species will grow and adapt as humanity did, or whether they will cling to limitations that no longer serve any useful purpose." Varakthul looked out at the stars, seeing them with new eyes. Throughout the galaxy, ancient assumptions were crumbling as humanity shared the gifts they had discovered during their exile. The carefully maintained order that had defined galactic civilization was giving way to something unprecedented, a transformation that would remake every species, every world, every consciousness that was willing to embrace it. "What do you want from us?" he asked finally. Admiral Chen smiled, and in that smile was the accumulated wisdom of a species that had spent 10,000 years learning to transcend every limitation that existence had placed upon them. "We want you to grow," she said. "We want you to become more than you are. We want to share with you what we've learned about the true nature of consciousness, of reality, of what's possible when beings refuse to accept the word impossible." She paused, looking out at the galaxy that was already beginning to change as humanity's influence spread like ripples across the cosmic ocean. "We want to welcome you to the universe as it really is, rather than the small corner of it you've convinced yourselves is all that exists." 1 year after the awakening, as historians would come to call it, the galaxy bore little resemblance to what it had been before humanity's return. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood in what had once been the council chamber on Council Central, now transformed into something that would have been unrecognizable to its original architects. The sterile, imposing space had been restructured as a living ecosystem where representatives from hundreds of species could interact not just politically but consciousness to consciousness, mind to mind, in ways that had previously been impossible. The quantum barriers that had once hidden Sol system had been repurposed as consciousness bridges, allowing beings across the galaxy to share experiences and perspectives with an intimacy that had revolutionized diplomacy. Where once there had been endless debates about competing interests and incompatible worldviews, there was now understanding that transcended language, culture, and even the basic nature of existence itself. "Dr. Vasquez," came a voice behind her. She turned to see Zexehai, the Nexari commander who had first encountered humanity's return. But like so many others, he had been transformed by what humans called the gift, the expansion of consciousness that allowed individuals to exist both as themselves and as part of something larger. "Commander," Elena replied, though she could already sense his thoughts through the quantum field that now connected all willing participants in the Galactic Consciousness Network. "How are the integration protocols proceeding on Nexar Prime?" Zexai's 4 eyes showed patterns that indicated not just contentment, but a joy that his species had never experienced before the awakening. "Beyond all expectations, our information-gathering capabilities have increased by orders of magnitude. But more importantly, we've discovered that information has meaning beyond simple data. We can now understand not just what happens, but why it matters." It was a common report. Across the galaxy, species were discovering capabilities they had never known they possessed. The Corvan warriors had learned that true strength came not from dominating enemies, but from uplifting allies. The Altarian scientists had transcended theoretical limitations to begin exploring dimensions of reality that their previous instruments couldn't even detect. The Vorthan traders had developed economic systems based on abundance rather than scarcity, creating wealth through collaboration rather than competition. Not every world had chosen transformation. Roughly 30% of council species had rejected humanity's gift, choosing instead to maintain their traditional forms of existence. Humanity had respected those choices, though they had also established what they called sanctuary worlds, places where individuals who wanted to explore expanded consciousness could go regardless of their species' official position. "Elena," came Admiral Chen's voice through the consciousness network, "we have visitors from Earth." Elena's awareness shifted, allowing her to perceive the new arrivals instantly. A delegation from humanity's homeworld was approaching, their ship a work of art that combined biological growth with crystalline matrices and energy fields that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that most beings couldn't perceive. But what made Elena's enhanced heart race was not the ship itself, but who was aboard it. These weren't just humans. They were representatives of what humanity had become in its deepest development. Beings who existed so far beyond baseline human consciousness that they were closer to forces of nature than individuals. The ship settled onto the Council Central's docking bay like a flower blooming in reverse, its living hull flowing into forms that provided perfect environmental adaptation for its passengers. When the airlock opened, what emerged challenged every preconception about the nature of identity itself. The lead figure appeared human in basic form, but her presence filled the space around her with something that could only be described as concentrated possibility. She was Dr. Kenji Nakamura, though that name barely contained the reality of what she had become. Over her 900 years of enhanced existence, she had grown beyond individual consciousness to become something that existed as both person and principle. Elena, Dr. Nakamura said, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated through multiple dimensions simultaneously. It's good to see the galaxy adapting so well to expanded reality. Elena felt the familiar disorientation that came from interacting with humanity's most evolved representatives. Dr. Nakamura existed simultaneously as an individual and as a living embodiment of everything humanity had learned during their exile. Speaking with her was like conversing with the accumulated experience of an entire species. Dr. Nakamura, welcome to Council Central. Though I suppose Central is no longer an accurate description. The evolved human smiled, an expression that somehow conveyed not just personal amusement but the joy of countless beings across multiple realities. Indeed, the concept of centralized authority becomes meaningless when consciousness can be shared instantaneously across galactic distances. How are the other species adapting to distributed governance? It was a good question. The old council structure with its rigid hierarchies and formal procedures had become obsolete almost overnight. Decisions that once required months of debate and negotiation could now be reached in minutes through direct consciousness sharing. But more importantly, the nature of decision-making itself had changed. Instead of competing interests being reconciled through compromise, different perspectives could be literally integrated to create solutions that served everyone's genuine needs. Remarkably well, Elena reported. The Alterans have developed philosophical frameworks that help other species process the transition. The Nexari are documenting everything for historical analysis. Even the Corvins have embraced collective decision-making once they understood it as a form of ultimate cooperation rather than submission. Dr. Nakamura's attention turned to the central display that showed the current state of galactic civilization. What had once been a map of separate territories controlled by different species was now a web of interconnected communities, with consciousness bridges linking worlds light-years apart and collaborative projects spanning multiple star systems. And the holdout worlds? Stable and respected, Elena assured her. We've established buffer zones of traditional space around them, maintained by species that chose partial integration. They can interact with the expanded galaxy on their own terms without feeling pressured to change. It was one of humanity's most important contributions to galactic civilization, the recognition that growth had to be voluntary to be meaningful. Forced evolution, no matter how beneficial it might appear, inevitably created resentment and instability. The galaxy was large enough to accommodate multiple forms of existence. Dr. Nakamura, came Zekshai's voice, may I ask about Earth itself? Those of us who have only experienced humanity's gift secondhand are curious about what 10,000 years of isolation created. The evolved human's expression shifted to something that might have been nostalgia, though in her case it encompassed the memories of an entire species. Earth has become something beyond a world, she said. It's a living laboratory where consciousness and reality interact in ways that approach the divine. We've learned to convince matter to take forms that serve our purposes. We've taught energy to obey intentions rather than laws. We've discovered that the universe is far more collaborative than your sciences suggested. She gestured, and the space around them filled with images that defied description. Cities that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, forests of crystalline trees that sang in harmonies that could influence the quantum foam of space itself, oceans that served as vast computational matrices for consciousness networks that spanned the planet. But perhaps the most important thing we've learned, Dr. Nakamura continued, is that evolution never ends. Even now, after 10,000 years of growth, we continue to discover new possibilities, new forms of existence, new ways to transcend limitations we didn't even know we had. The images shifted to show something even more extraordinary. Humans who existed as pure consciousness, unbound by physical form, exploring realities that existed beyond the normal universe. Others who had learned to exist as living forces of nature, their awareness spanning solar systems as they guided the development of entire stellar regions. The exile that was meant to contain us became the catalyst for unlimited growth. Dr. Nakamura explained, "Your galaxy sought to imprison humanity within a single star system. Instead, you taught us to transcend the need for physical space entirely." Elena felt a familiar sense of awe as she contemplated the magnitude of what humanity had achieved, but also something else, excitement for what the galaxy might become now that those achievements were being shared. "What happens now?" she asked. "Where do we go from here?" Dr. Nakamura's smile encompassed possibilities that stretched across eons. "Now we explore what lies beyond this galaxy. Now we discover what forms consciousness can take when it's not limited by the assumptions of any single species. Now we learn what the universe looks like to beings who have transcended every limitation that existence once placed upon them." She paused, her attention turning to something that existed beyond normal perception. "The barriers between realities are much thinner than your sciences suggest. There are other galaxies, other forms of life, other possibilities for existence that we've only begun to explore. Humanity's exile taught us to look inward for growth. Our reunion with galactic civilization is teaching us to look outward for adventure." As if summoned by her words, the space around Council Central began to shimmer. Reality itself seemed to ripple as massive structures became visible in dimensions that hadn't existed moments before. Ships that dwarfed entire space stations materialized from what had appeared to be empty void. Habitats that existed as pure geometric forms in spaces that folded back on themselves revealed populations numbering in the billions. "The galaxy you knew was just the beginning," Dr. Nakamura announced. "What humanity discovered during our exile was that reality has no limits, only possibilities waiting to be explored. The question isn't what we can become, but what we choose to become." Elena looked out at the transformed galaxy, seeing not an ending but a beginning. The lies that had shaped galactic civilization for 10 millennia had been swept away, replaced by truths that opened infinite possibilities. Species that had been limited by their assumptions about consciousness, reality, and existence itself were discovering capabilities they had never imagined. But perhaps most importantly, they were learning to grow together. The isolation that had driven humanity to transcend their limitations was ending. The galaxy was becoming something unprecedented, a conscious entity in its own right, composed of billions of minds working together to explore possibilities that none of them could have conceived individually. "Dr. Nakamura," Elena said finally, "thank you for showing us what we could become, for sharing what you learned, for proving that even the greatest mistakes can become the foundation for unimaginable growth." The evolved human's response carried the warmth of an entire species welcoming their long-lost family home.
"Elena, we have 10,000 years of discoveries to share and an infinite universe to explore together."
The adventure is just beginning. As Council Central continued its transformation into something that could serve as a hub for galactic consciousness, Elena felt the presence of billions of minds joining the growing network. Scientists sharing breakthrough insights across species barriers, artists collaborating on works that incorporated multiple forms of perception, children from 100 different worlds playing together in virtual spaces that adapted to accommodate every form of life. The galaxy that had once hidden from humanity's potential was embracing it fully. The species that had once been too dangerous to exist freely had become the catalyst for the greatest expansion of consciousness in galactic history. And somewhere beyond the edge of known space, other galaxies waited to discover what universe they would help create when consciousness itself became the building material for reality. The Terran quarantine had ended not with humanity's defeat, but with the galaxy's transformation. The secret that had been hidden for 10,000 years was finally free, and it was more beautiful than anyone had ever dared to imagine. Earth locked away for millennia, the timeless secret they concealed. HFY. Sci-Fi Stories.